In 218 BC, Hannibal dragged war elephants over snowbound cliffs to strike at Rome. 2,000 years later, Napoleon did the same with cannons and mules. In World War I, avalanches killed more soldiers than bullets. And in World War II, Hitler dreamed of making the Alps his final fortress. But what do all these stories have in common? The answer? A single mountain range that has shaped Europe more than kings or parliaments. This is the story of the Alps, Europe's backbone. Today on Map Mind, we'll explore how the Alps shaped Europe's history. Don't forget to subscribe and join Map Mind Nation so you never miss videos like this. The Alps didn't just appear, they were forged in violence. 65 million years ago, the African plate slammed into Europe, thrusting seabeds into the sky and folding them into jagged ridges. Out of that collision rose a 1,200-kilometer barrier of stone and snow, creating mountains like Mont Blanc, the Matterhorn, and countless other peaks. Today, the Alps stretch across 8 countries, each shaped by the mountains in its own way. In France, Mont Blanc and Chamonix gave birth to modern mountaineering. Just across the peaks, Switzerland built its very identity, and even its famous neutrality, on alpine fortresses and valleys. To the south, Italy's Dolomites rise like jagged cathedrals, remembered both for the battles of the White War and as world-class ski resorts. At the edge of the range, tiny Monaco touches the Alps where cliffs tumble into the Mediterranean. While nearby, Liechtenstein survives entirely within alpine valleys. Further east, Austria thrives on Tyrolean culture and alpine rivers that feed the Danube. Meanwhile, in Germany, Bavaria's castles and fairy tale villages stand beneath Zugspitze, the country's highest peak. And at the far southeast, Slovenia's Julian Alps form a wild frontier where Slavic and Mediterranean cultures meet. More than 14 million people live among their valleys, speaking a mosaic of languages from German to French, Italian, Slovene, and the ancient Romansh of Switzerland. From the beginning, these peaks decided whether people thrived or perished. They were both cradle and cage. The Greeks called them Alps, from albus, meaning white. But long before outsiders named them, people were here. Archaeology shows alpine settlements 7,000 years ago. Most haunting is Otzi, the Iceman, a 5,300-year-old traveler found frozen in the ice. He carried weapons, tools, even unfinished arrows. His death was violent, a reminder that in the Alps, nature wasn't the only enemy. For early tribes like the Helvetii and Rhaetians, the passes meant power. Whoever held them controlled wealth, migration, and survival. Then came Hannibal. In 218 BC, the Carthaginian general led an army with its famously elephants across the Alps to strike at Rome from the north. Nearly half his force died in the crossing, but the shock was immense. Rome had believed the Alps were impenetrable. Hannibal proved them wrong. For Rome, the very survival of the Republic was on the line. With just 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry left, Hannibal crushed Roman armies at Trebia, ambushed them at Lake Trasimene, and annihilated 70,000 men at Cannae. For years, he roamed Italy undefeated. And yet, he never took Rome. He lacked siege weapons, reinforcements, and time. After 15 years, he was recalled to Carthage, where Scipio Africanus finally defeated him at Zama. Hannibal showed the world that even the Alps could be crossed, but not even his genius could stop Rome's rise. So how did Rome succeed where Hannibal failed? By making the Alps their own. Rome paved the passes, roads like the Great St. Bernard, turning death traps into lifelines. Merchants, messengers, and legions now flowed where once only herders dared tread. But when the empire collapsed in the 5th century, waves of Germanic tribes swept through the gaps. The Alps became a frontier again, carved up between Franks, Lombards, and later the Holy Roman Empire. Here, the fight was no longer over Rome. It was over borders, and who would control Europe itself. Castles like Chateau de Chillon and Fort Bard still stand as reminders of that time, perched on cliffs to guard the valleys below. The Alps became both shield and bridge. Salt and silk caravans turned towns like Milan and Innsbruck into wealthy crossroads. And in 1291, farmers and herders swore an oath that created the Swiss Confederacy. Their independence wasn't luck. Geography gave them walls no enemy could breach. The Alps became not just Europe's shield, but the foundation of nations. Even culture was shaped here. Yodeling echoed from valley to valley, alpine cheeses like Emmental and Gruyere became staples, and the isolation of high valleys preserved unique dialects still spoken today. But who would control those nations? The answer would change again when a general named Napoleon rode into history. In 1800, Napoleon Bonaparte marched his army across the Great St. Bernard Pass, echoing Hannibal centuries before. Jacques-Louis David immortalized him as a hero on a rearing stallion. The truth? Napoleon crossed on a mule, while soldiers dragged cannons through snow and mud. At stake was Italy's future, and with it, Europe's balance of power. The gamble worked. Napoleon surprised the Austrians, won at Marengo, and redrew Europe's map. Once again, the Alps weren't just background. They were the difference between victory and defeat. By 1915, the Alps became a killing field. Italy and Austria-Hungary fought across the Dolomites in what soldiers called the White War. This wasn't trenches. It was tunnels carved into glaciers, bunkers blasted from cliffs, and battles fought at 3,000 meters. Soldiers froze in ice caves, starved in snowstorms, and died under avalanches. The cost, an estimated 90,000 men buried under snow, nearly half of all alpine casualties. Even today, as glaciers retreat, the mountains release their dead. Rifles, helmets, and frozen bodies emerging from the ice. The Alps had become not just a battlefield, but a graveyard. 2 decades later, the Brenner Pass became the lifeline between Hitler and Mussolini. Troops, tanks, and supplies thundered through alpine valleys. But the mountains weren't only highways, they became hiding places. Italian partisans waged guerrilla war in forests and caves, ambushing convoys and sabotaging rail lines. Villages paid dearly in reprisals. As the Reich collapsed, Nazi leaders dreamed of an alpine fortress, a last stand in the mountains. It never materialized, but it revealed how deeply the Alps were seen as Europe's ultimate stronghold. This time, the stakes were existential, the very survival of regimes. And yet, when the guns fell silent, the Alps transformed again. Farmers reclaimed the valleys, mountaineers returned to the peaks, and tourists poured in. Today, the Alps are home to 14 million people and welcome 120 million visitors each year. Tourism alone brings in $80 billion annually. They are Europe's water towers, the source of rivers like the Rhine, Rhone, and Inn, sustaining hundreds of millions downstream. They're also where modern mountaineering was born. The first ascent of Mont Blanc in 1786 marked the dawn of alpinism. Since then, the Alps have tested generations of climbers, from the perilous Eiger North Face to the peaks that host the Winter Olympics. But now, a new battle is underway. The glaciers are shrinking, and winters are shorter. And the very backbone that once protected Europe is now warning it. The Alps are not just history, they're part of your life today. The water in your glass may have begun as alpine snow. The chocolate or cheese on your plate was shaped by alpine traditions. And the energy grids of Europe still depend on alpine rivers for hydropower. From Hannibal's elephants to Napoleon's mule, from avalanches that buried armies to villages that birthed nations. The Alps have always decided Europe's fate. They were a barrier, a bridge, a battlefield, and today, a lifeline. And they remind us of a simple truth. Geography is never just background, it is the backbone on which history and our future is written.